Day of Climate to expand.
Please join me in welcoming our host to the stage, Ginger Z.
Thank you all so much. So the theme is It's Time, and it's time, well, it's been a couple of minutes. So thank you for waiting, because they're working on a couple of things. I know your time is incredibly important, so thank you. So I'm the chief meteorologist and chief climate correspondent at ABC News. Time is all I do. This morning I was told you have 55 seconds to talk about the landfalling hurricane by the end of this week coming to the eastern Gulf Coast of Mexico. I've done this for a long time, so 55 seconds is like 10 minutes. Felt really good. But I definitely work on deadlines and understand time, as most of us do, I would say. But from timing the first tornado that I chased back in the year 2000, because I studied storm chasing, to the time, and it took all of about 30 seconds, it took me to realize that my first big storm that I covered, Hurricane Katrina, was not about the science, as I thought it was, but it was about people. To time that felt like a rush after I was in New Orleans covering Hurricane Ida so many years later. A Cat 4 had just made landfall, and usually I get at least a couple of days to cover it and show the impact to humans, but no. We had this storm, and the computer model saying that it was going to, in the next 24 hours, flood New York City and New Jersey to the point that we would lose dozens of lives, and we did. I felt rushed. It's time. The timing of the challenge every single day when we get the headlines in on TV. So you have 30 seconds, you've got to get the heat in Phoenix 113 days straight, smashing the old record of consecutive 100-degree days by more than a month, but also then show how those connections to fossil fuels and the emissions of humans are happening. Do it now, in time. So I get it. Everyone that's going to speak today has their own natural disasters. There are big corporations that have to run a business. There are everyone in politics that have a myriad of issues that the growing populations where they live have to deal with. But it is time. Climate as a priority. We're going to keep doing it, and I'll be honest, we are so far from perfect. I hope we hear more about honesty today from everyone that speaks, so we can know where we're starting, so that we actually know how quickly and where we have to go. It's certainly time for that. Speaking of time, I am delighted now to introduce someone who has long been at the forefront of the fight against climate change. He has championed clean energy, relentless emissions reductions, environmental justice, and decarbonization. The Climate Group is honored to have him kickstart the Hub Live, so please put your hands together. Join me in welcoming Governor Jay Insley of Washington State.
Good morning. Thank you, Ginger. She was talking about the rain. It is raining, but it's raining good news, too. And all those Climate Week, I think we ought to take a moment to recognize that. I will say that when I talk in New York, I usually start by sharing my feelings about the New York Yankees. However, I'm going to diverge from that script because of the nobility and importance of our particular time together here. My comments will be focused on a couple messages. One, that these truly are great days. And two, we truly are people, every single one in this room, and everyone you know, and all of your relatives, and all of your co-entrepreneurs are capable of taming this beast of climate change. And I want to start by saying why I believe these are great days. And I'm channeling Sylvia Earle here a little bit. She is a person who is an oceanographer biography. She opened an aquarium the other day in Seattle. And she talked about the fact that we are in a unique time in human history. We in this room. No other time in human history have people been able to come together to fundamentally change life on the planet. This is a very unique moment. And so these are great days. And these are days where we can and are making a difference. And I think it's important just for a moment to take a little historical reflection about the kind of time this is. We go back a few years where we had a fellow who said climate change was a hoax and windmills cause cancer. He was fired. We're going to have to perhaps do that job again. And things were kind of at a nadir. We knew the climate science was going south. But what has happened since then? Since then, in my state, we have reduced our CO2 emissions per unit of GDP by 30%. We have adopted a 100% clean energy plan. We have adopted a low carbon fuel standard. We have adopted the most effective building code standards and most efficiency standards in the country. And now we have the most vigorous energetic cap and trade system in the United States, driving down pollution and generating billions of dollars for Washingtonians to get EVs and heat pumps and help with their energy bills. And in the White House, we have the Biden-Harris administration, who's given us the most powerful climate change action in the history of humans with the Infrastructure Act and the Inflation Reduction Act. Look at what we have accomplished in a very relatively short period of time together. And this is a momentum that I believe is unstoppable. The people are with us on this. The science is with us. The entrepreneurs are with us. And hope is with us. And we have discovered the single most important renewable energy source in human history. And that's the human spirit. And I believe this is an unconquerable force in this right now, because everybody in this world has something they treasure that they want to protect. Usually starts with their kids or their grandkids, or Mount Rainier, which has now lost 40% of its glacial ice. And since everyone has something they care about, this is why we have such momentum in this regard. So if I can, let me talk about the things and the reasons we have been effective. One, we are inspiring each other. And I think if you take anything from my comments, I hope you'll go home and think about the ability to inspire other people. Your co-entrepreneurs, your legislators, your mayors, your neighbors. We all have the capability of doing that. And I start, when I talk about my journey on this, I've been working on this for literally 3 decades now. And I think of the people who've inspired me. Al Gore is one of them. He's won the Nobel Peace Prize. He's done great work. He started this, 30 years ago to educate the world about this. But there's another person I want to note. Her name was Alexandra Villaseñor. I was here several years ago in New York. I was walking down the street in front of the UN, and here was this young woman sitting on a park bench in front of the United Nations. And she was holding a little sign. It was like 8 by 10. It wasn't a big sign. It said, "Stop climate change." And I just stopped and asked her, what are you doing here? And she said, "I'm fighting climate change." And I go, "Yeah, you're sitting here." She goes, "Yeah, that's how you start a social movement." And she now is leading, one of our nation's leaders with the young generation fighting climate change. That inspired me. And I'm here just to say everybody in this room has the capability of doing that. And we know that that can succeed. It can succeed because we have both the human spirit with us, but also the human intellect. Let me just share some things from Washington State. We are only 2% of America's population. For those of you who don't know, we're in the northwest corner of America. But we are 100% committed to building a clean energy economy to tame this beast. And we are doing this. A couple little examples. I met a guy named Rick Luby years ago, maybe 20 years ago now. He had this little dream that maybe we could come up with better batteries somehow. So he had this little 5-person shop on the shores of Lake Union. And I went and visited him where he was wiring little capacitors together in the lake. And now yesterday, he was just the recipient of a $200 million grant in the infrastructure bill where he is building a giant manufacturing plant in Moses Lake, Washington, where we used to grow sugar beets. We'd use photosynthesis to make sugar. Now we're using the sun's energy to drive our electrical grid. And he's putting hundreds of people to work. And as you drive through central Washington, you see these kind of sagebrush flat plains, and then you see this giant infrastructure being built. And he's not alone. Right next door to him is a company called Acela that's doing the same thing, where they're building the world's most advanced silicon anode batteries to increase battery capacity by 30%. Right across Snoqualmie Pass, we find in Seattle, Washington, and Everett, Washington, 3 in one county. Actually, 2, I fudged a little bit. In 2 counties, 10 miles apart, we have 3 of the most advanced fusion energy companies in the world today, just in one little state, because we have made a commitment to solve this problem. And when I say we, I mean we. Look, years ago, when I knew the federal government wasn't going to be quite as aggressive as they should be, I started a thing called the U.S. Climate Alliance with Governor Jerry Brown of California and Governor Cuomo. We now have 24 states, all of whom are committed to the same goal of taming this beast. And these 24 states represent 60% of the United States economy. And those 24 states have larger economic growth than the states who are not in the U.S. Climate Alliance, because we are all adopting policies we know that can give entrepreneurs both a pull and a push in their ability to grow their dreams to build a clean energy economy. We have the Under 2 Coalition, and we have governors from around the world who are working together. And by the way, when I go to the United Nations, I go to these conferences, and they speak of we states as subnationals, right? They call us subnationals. That's a bunch of hogwash. We are supranationals. And we are supranationals because we can always go faster, farther than our federal governments. It's true in almost any nation in the world that lower, smaller communities can move faster than the national community. And that's why I'm excited to be here at Climate Week, working with my fellow governors across the world to advance this cause, which we are doing. So I believe that we are now, in some sense, already perfected the power of fusion, because we have fused the spirit of people around the world with the intellect of people around the world to be able to solve this problem. And at the same time, we are growing our economy like crazy. So I want to ask you to go home and take one thing from New York City. One, share them what I think about the New York Yankees first, which you'll have to guess. But second, I do think you'll go home and feel empowered. I hope you feel engaged. I hope you'll feel that you can make a difference, because you can make a difference. Everybody in this room can make a difference. And I hope you go home from New York and realize that dream. We're going to tame this beast. We are going to build the best clean energy economy in the world. We are going to continue federal movement to build clean energy. We're going to continue our state movement to build clean energy. We're going to empower entrepreneurs to get this job done. Our kids deserve it. We're going to make sure that this happens. Good luck. Let's go win this. Thank you.
I know I get empowered when I think about fusion, so I'm looking forward to that. I'm going to have to cover it very soon. So let's talk about where we go next. This is exciting because we get to welcome in Tim Lenton, Chair in Climate Change and Earth System Science, University of Exeter, and Helen Clarkson, CEO of the Climate Group. They're going to come up to the stage, and the conversation will be Leading with Hope, assessing the role of positive tipping points, not the few words that you hear often together. So come on up. Thank you.
Great, Tim, it's great to be here with you. We're co-star in the video that's playing on a bit of a loop outside there, so people can see Tim all day, should they wish to. But it's really good now to come and talk about your report and understand what do you mean by positive tipping points. As Ginger said, we don't normally hear those words together. Let's start a bit, though, with the science. So talk about the urgency and the need for us to really double down on climate action at this point.
Well, for 20 years, I've been studying the bad tipping points in the climate that, unfortunately, we look at grave risk of crossing at least 5 of them. Maybe I need to land what the idea of a tipping point is first. So you can, if you're feeling bold, you can always lean back on your chair and remind yourself that in that case, with that very simple system, there's a balance point where a little nudge one way or the other makes a big difference to your fate, whether you end up back upright or sprawled on your back on the floor. But unfortunately, in the climate, we've got that same kind of dynamics, that same risk. And it's right there now for 2 major ice sheets in Greenland and West Antarctica that hold between them over 10 meters of sea level rise, for the frozen soils of the Arctic, the permafrost that's starting to thaw abruptly, adding greenhouse gases to the atmosphere, amplifying warming, but also a risk of a tipping point in coral reefs, which 500 million people depend on for their livelihoods. So these are very real risks of both abrupt and very difficult to reverse changes in the climate, which should be telling us this situation is absolutely urgent and we need to radically accelerate action to end fossil fuel burning, shut down all greenhouse gas emissions. And we need to be going actually more than 5 times faster than we are at decarbonising the economy.
Absolutely. And so then let's talk about positive tipping points so we can switch on to what you're talking about here.
So behind any tipping point is because within the system we're interested in, whether it's an ice sheet or the car sector or the power sector, there are reinforcing or amplifying, we call them feedback loops. So little change can go round the system and give back a bigger change and a bigger change. And in the economy that we all know we need to transform, major sectors, there are really well-known amplifiers. The more we make something, the better we get at making it. The more we make something, the more units we produce, the cheaper the next unit gets to produce. We'd call those things learning by doing in economies of scale. But also as consumers, we have a habit of following what each other consume. We talk about that as academics as social contagion, but we've seen the evidence for social contagion in the uptake of things like solar panels on people's roofs and electric vehicles. So these both technological and industrial and social feedbacks can come together. And if they get strong enough, you get what would be called a critical mass tipping point, where one more person adopting an electric vehicle is enough to tip the majority of the rest of the population to adopt.
Yeah, and so reading your report, I've done a lot on systems change, and so I knew my tipping points and my balancing. But the thing that jumped out at me reading it was super tipping points. I was like, oh, I haven't heard about those before. So can you talk us through we've got negative, positive, and then super positive.
Yeah, so I'm excited to be here because today we've launched this new report. It's called A Positive Tipping Cascade in Power, Transport and Heating. But the idea here is, just as the climate is a complex system where you change one thing and it affects another, just like in your body, if you have a heart attack, it has impacts on other organs. In the economy, we're talking about the positive here, there is coupling between different sectors. So for example, the electric vehicle sector is at or past or heading towards a tipping point, depending on the country. That's bringing down the price of batteries radically, by a factor of 10 in the last decade. Cheap batteries are a crucial enabler for the tipping point in the power sector in electricity, where if we want to get the 100% renewables, we need lots of cheap battery storage available to balance electricity supply and demand. There's a bunch of these other couplings, which for the very first time we've tried to quantify with a state-of-the-art model, and not just look at the tipping point in individual sectors, power, cars, trucks, heating and cooling our homes, but capture these couplings. And then what that tells you is, oh wow, if I put in the right decisive policy in one sector, it doesn't just bring forward the tipping point there, it can bring forward the tipping point in another sector markedly. And that's why I like the language you've adopted, Helen. Then it's like a super tipping point. These killer policies are the ones that aren't just going to trigger tipping in one sector, they're going to trigger it to cascade.
Yeah, and I think it's really important, so much of the discourse around, say, EVs is being driven, I talk about this all the time, disinformation from fossil fuel industry. So many people come up to me and say, yeah, but the batteries and da-da-da. And I think people don't really understand this really crucial role or the lives that batteries lead once they leave vehicles and can go into kind of supporting the power sector and how that works and creates this change.
Yeah, on that specific example, folks, you might retire a battery from a car at maybe 80% of its original capacity, but it'll be good on the grid down to 20% capacity doing useful work there, many thousands of charge-discharge cycles. Of course, there's also vehicle-to-grid coupling, that's plug your car in and have two-way flow of electricity. But I expect, as an audience, if you heard me say there are decisive policies that can bring these things forwards, you might be wondering what the decisive policies are. And what we've done is systematically compare like 3 major types of policy. What you'd think of as taxes, a carbon price, what you'd think of as stimulus packages, and what you'd think of, called mandates. And the crucial thing is, it's mandates like you're not going to be able to sell petrol and diesel cars in our market in 2035, or all coal-burning power stations should be shut down in rich nations by 2035. It's those mandates that are the most powerful and effective policy at bringing forward positive tipping, not just in their sector, but across sectors. And that's because they're the thing that can really stimulate innovation and set that clear path. Everybody knows, right, this is what's coming, let's double down, let's go.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting as well, about businesses and how they feel about regulation. And obviously we run the Hundreds campaigns and Steel Zero, Concrete Zero, and a lot of those are about taking that demand from businesses and actually engaging in policy change like this. And I think people are surprised when we say sort of, not that businesses are necessary, and we've got lots of business people here, if you say businesses like regulation, that sounds odd, but it's more that it creates that framework that everyone is operating on a level playing field, or they know the rules of the road ahead and the rules of the game and what's coming. Can you give us some other examples of, a bit more on those policy signals that governments can send?
For sure. So I probably gave you a hint there of what we think, or what we show to be really effective policy mandates here. And I'm not saying that there isn't a role sometimes for taxes and subsidies alongside that. But what I really want to emphasize on this point that Helen's making about there's the regulator, the top-down policy, and then there's you as good actors joining coalitions together as buyers, for example, or committing to we're only going to have 100% electric vehicle fleet in EV 100 by whenever, or EV 100 plus. What I'd emphasize is policymakers are going to need also that feedback from you, because you know what's going to happen when they set those mandates. They're going to have every lobbyist in Washington on their back. And what they need, it's a bit like feeling that you've got the popular consensus from the voters. If the signal's coming from the bottom up from business that we're also up for this, we're already making the move, we're committing to the new technology, then you get a feedback loop between business and policy. And you're absolutely right. I know you all want the most clear policy path to be set and to trust political leadership that it won't waver on that, which of course is sometimes an if. But I come from a country where this stuff is written into law in the Climate Change Act, so it's not partisan, it's cross-party, written into law. That certainly helps.
Yeah, definitely. Though even in the UK, we had this wobble where the end date for electric vehicles suddenly, the last government backed away from it, and you could see how it affected businesses and how they were thinking, because they're saying, well, we had this plan. So I think the main thing is around that sort of certainty, as you say. Can you say a bit more about technological innovation? I realise I talk too much probably about policy, but talk about technological innovation and how that's going to help us cross some of these positive.
Well, technology innovation, of course, lies behind the fact that we now have renewable power, solar or wind as the cheapest form of electricity we've ever had, which is pretty extraordinary. But innovation always continues. And when you have one innovation that's bringing a new thing to a new human activity like moving around or powering our homes, it has a habit of stimulating further innovations that can make the parent innovation more useful. That also is a kind of feedback loop that can add to the tipping. So, for example, we know right now in the US, great stuff with the Inflation Reduction Act, but there's loads of new renewables that are backed up waiting to be connected to the grid. But what you might not have heard is that there's a new kind of cable that doubles the power you can basically send down the existing pylon lines without having to build new, bigger pylons. It's I could have picked out many examples of innovation, but this is happening all the time. And of course, having a culture that supports the innovation, that's going to reinforce the other innovations is all part of the picture.
And also presumably part of that loop that you're talking about with the tipping points.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And that's where it's a cultural thing, and I think it's good to see the winds of change are shifting towards reigniting that sense of this is a huge opportunity to seize together. This isn't just for the climate, this is better for our health. The 5 million people worldwide that are dying still every year from fossil fuel air pollution, we can get rid of those deaths. We've got cleaner, quieter cities and environments. There's a lot to seize in this, which brings us back to that word positive.
Yeah, and that was going to be just my last question about hope, actually. And you talk a lot about the importance of leading with hope. Can you just talk a bit about how that cultivation of the sense of hope can really help us move forward?
Yeah, you can imagine being me if you spend 20 years staring down, well, I think of the barrel of the climate gun, watching those climate tipping points come closer towards you and feeling the kind of visceral terror of that. So I've had to work. I had to take the equipment I had to the solution side and see if it was plausible grounds for hope, as a friend of mine calls it, a credible case to be made that we really could accelerate the change we need as much as we need to. And thankfully, working on it, you see, yes, this is possible, but then my optimism is not naive optimism, it's a conditional optimism, because it's conditional on at least a fraction of you joining me in committing to bringing the change forward and accelerating it. By the way, we don't need everyone to act. That's the beauty of tipping points. But we typically need 10, 20% of us to act. And that'll be enough to tip everybody else, even what are called the laggards. There's always the laggards. There's always the people who resist the most and will be the last to change. But I'm optimistic because I'm optimistic some of you are going to come with me and commit on this journey. And I think we see that with that tying up of your bottom-up initiatives and hopefully some better leadership from the top down from policy.
Great. Well, Tim, thank you very much. I really recommend, I hope you can hear the enthusiasm, his report. Go on, give us a there you go.
So we've got a
Also
few
available
copies.
online.
Just grab me or some of my colleagues who are here, and we'll look forward to chatting to you in the break.
Brilliant. Well, please join me in thanking Tim for this.
Y'all good? Okay. Hope you all are enjoying. I am back to, and really honored to be able to moderate this panel. And we are now sitting down. I want to make sure, since we walked on nice and quietly, that you know who everyone is. First, here on your left, Mayor Yvonne Aki-Soya, and she is the mayor of Freetown, co-chair of C40 Cities. And then we have JC right next to me, Pribulski, Chief Sustainability Officer at Nike, and Nancy Mann, the Chief Sustainability Officer at the Estee Lauder Companies. Really, really, really happy to be on the stage with you ladies, and I'm so looking forward to this. So we're talking about corporations, but also governments, and how those two things can even work together. Don't know, but I loved how you said, oh, I always say Nike instead of Nike. So for today, maybe we go between the two. Okay. Nancy, let's start with you, because we were discussing how much has your job changed, right, to me? And my job has changed a lot, especially as the climate warms rapidly. I've noticed, even in the computer models, the way that I read models, the way that the model biases have shifted. I've had to change the way that I forecast. I used to be a conservative forecaster. Now the models are always overprinting everything. Things change fast. So I know the Estee Lauder Companies has worked tirelessly at being a leader. I know that you've reached your goal of getting to your 2025 goal, and now are superseding it, which you don't hear very often, so congratulations. But how do you do all of this and then inspire others to make systemic change? So tell me what you all are doing.
Sure. Well, first of all, thanks to the Climate Group for having me, and so happy to be on this incredibly austere panel, and also the fact that it's an all-female panel. Mm-hmm. When I started in my job, it was very rare to have an all-female panel. Thank you. Thank you to the Climate Group and all the great work. So, I always say that climate change, or fighting climate in a corporation, is a bit like parenting. As soon as you know what you're doing, it changes. And generally, what we've tried to do is to look at, we have a series of corporate goals, like many companies. Carbon interacts with a lot of those goals, whether it be packaging or our EV goal. And what we've tried to do is really work as a team. We've created these goals, and we glide past out how we would get to the goal, both financially and programmatically. And so we have a governance structure that oversees that, and each quarter we report on how we're doing. And we find that our SMEs are incredible partners in alerting us to, we're a little behind. It's a resourcing issue. We're ahead. We were able to get more PCR. But I think generally what we've seen is the real challenge really is the scale of solutions. We've done very well with solar. We've done very well with VPPA wind. But generally, we need more solutions in more countries.
You also mentioned something that was interesting. It's not just to meet your goal, but to maintain them.
Yeah, I always say it's a bit like dieting. It's not like a point in time. And what we've really tried to do in the company is create a climate-aware muscle. So we've done big trainings. We're a house of brands. We have 29 brands, everything from Le Labo to Joe Malone. And what we've done is our climate team has done a training with our brand, particularly our marketing leads, because the bottom line is 99% of our footprint now is scope 3. And the big piece of that is not what we call direct procurement. It's basically agencies. So we've done trainings with our brand leaders, the people who make the decisions of which agency to work with. And we brought in our colleagues from other departments. We've done a similar training around product and product sustainability. I think what's fascinating about these jobs in consumer industries is one is you want the company to grow. You want to decouple growth from carbon increase in emissions. And then you want to make sure that the interplay of your goals gets you ultimately to where you want to go. So you can have, for instance, pick a glass for a package that's very carbon intensive because glass is very carbon intensive. So it really is, I'd say, empathizing with the business, partnering with the business, and really mainstreaming what you do. A friend of mine said that what we're trying to do is work our way out of a job. I guess fortunately or unfortunately, it keeps getting harder, so I still have the job.
And ESG is not out. You said that sometimes people ask you that.
Yes, there's people have asked. I mean, one of the things that we see again and again is our consumers, particularly in Europe and the UK, and younger folks care deeply about climate. They care about it in different ways, and we can talk about that later. But we also find that our investors care deeply. I was recently on a trip with our CFO to Stockholm and Paris. Every single meeting, I was asked a climate question. They really see it also as, which is true, it's efficiency. So for instance, we've switched our shipping from planes to boats. Well, boats are cheaper. They're also lower carbon. And so we look for that double win, but I would say it's alive and well, and certainly we need more leaders.
Thank you. All right, Mayor, let's move to you. I know you've had quite a morning already, so really glad that you made it. But you've received so many accolades globally for Freetown, the Tree Town. It was a campaign that focused on reforestation, climate resilience, and it was, first, tell us about what that campaign was in case people are not familiar, and how it worked, and what you all will do next.
Thanks. So Freetown, the Tree Town is our campaign. It started off with 1 million trees. So I became mayor in 2018 on a climate ticket. I didn't call it climate. That wouldn't have got many votes. But I talked to people about flooding. I talked to people about heat. Well, not less heat then, heat more now. But the things that actually impact their lives, and in our case, landslides and floods were two major consequences. So coming into office, we developed a plan for the city, #Transform Freetown. It had as its number 1 of 4 clusters, resilience. And that was even before people were really thinking about it in that way in my country. But what was our key target within that was to address the deforestation that had really triggered my desire to run for office. And that 1 million trees, Freetown, the Tree Town, was not just about planting trees, but about growing trees. And interestingly, you say that this work will get you out of a job. Actually, one of the things that we've seen is that climate action really can create jobs. And Freetown, the Tree Town is one such example, because every tree is individually tagged. It has an individual identifier code. It has a grower, so we're employing thousands of young people who plant and grow, and they maintain and monitor those trees over a period of time. We exceeded our target. We are literally just at 1.2 million, and now we've set a new target for 4 million. And this is really important because you've talked a lot in what you said about how, as a corporation, you're looking at reducing emissions, your carbon footprint. And it's important that we recognize that the world is a very diverse place, and there are many countries such as ours who haven't contributed greatly to that carbon emission, contributed to the climate crisis we have now, but are suffering the consequences. You only need to turn on your television to see that there were terrible floods in Nigeria. I was in the Philippines about 3 weeks ago and experienced a typhoon. So the consequences of climate are really impacting millions of people. So adaptation, doing things like planting, reforesting, reducing slopes, stabilizing slopes, protecting water catchments, ensuring that you've got economic productivity. These are all practical nature-based solutions which also create a carbon sink, suck up some of that carbon that's being produced by those who've been producing the carbon. But yes, so that's where we are, just one. But if I could quickly just say, in addition to being the mayor of Freetown, I'm also the global co-chair of C40 Cities, which is a network of 98 cities across the world. Started off actually as C40 cities around the Paris Agreement. So it was mainly Western, Northern Hemisphere cities, global North cities. But over the years, we've grown, and we now have 98. And one of the things we've recognized is, firstly, 75% of C40 cities, especially those who are emitters, have more ambitious and effective, and being more effective in reducing their emissions than their national governments. So cities are at the front line, and cities can make a difference. But at the same time, we've also seen that over 50% of the populations we represent, these 98 cities, we represent over 700 million people. And many of those people are experiencing the impacts of climate change. So to be a member of C40, just as you have a plan and you have your targets, every single city has to have a climate action plan. And we're not like the UN club, no disrespect to national governments, but you can do an NDC, not follow it, not stick to it, and still be okay. Mm-hmm. If you don't meet your climate action plans in C40, after 3 years, you're out. Mm-hmm. So we're really incentivized to make sure we're working together. We have a lot of challenges as cities, whether you're global north or global south, access to finance, cooperation with our national governments, cooperation with corporates, and getting our residents on board. But we are all committed to playing our part in making a difference. And I think I'm just going to end on that, that this isn't just about meeting targets, particularly for us who are city leaders. We see at the front line every day what it means to be impacted by climate. The climate crisis, the climate breakdown is on us. Whether it's burning temperatures, which affect your outdoor workers, affect those living in informal settlements, whether it's flooding that I've mentioned already, whether it's air pollution, all of these things affect the health, the social status, access to water, everything. And being city leaders, it means we have to deal with that. So I think I'd just like to end on this. It's not just a question of meeting targets. It's a question of us together actually ensuring that we have a future.
And I love the focus on Tree Town, that there's the maintenance, because I know an average city tree, a lot of people can put trees into cities, but an average lifespan is 7 years, because trees in a city is difficult, right? And so you've really paid for that to not happen. Are other cities taking note? Have anyone else started the program?
Absolutely. So we're now working on Tree Town Africa. We're signing an MOU with the city of Shwani in South Africa. But perhaps my biggest sort of compliment is the mayor of Phoenix is also doing Freetown, the Tree Town, in their own way, inspired by what we're doing, because it really is a game changer, you know. Like I mentioned, I was in the Philippines. Quezon City are also taking it up. But beyond that, many cities, it's doing reforestation, which is common. It is a sort of go-to solution, but it's doing it in a way which is enabling us to build sustainability. So we've signed with a carbon developer a couple of months ago, and we're now building out all the accreditation that's required to ensure that we can access the financing as well, that will enable us to go from the million, 1.2 to 4 and onwards, and it's kind of. And that platform, because we've got a digital platform, that digital platform we make available to others to use as well. So no one's having to reinvent the wheel.
Nice, thank you. All right, JC, let's talk about how Nike is ensuring that the pledges and all of the goals and these things that we're talking about actually become meaningful and measurable climate solutions.
Great. Well, first, thank you, Ginger, and thanks to the Climate Group for being here. When we think about climate change, we approach the work with a sense of energy, but also a real sense of commitment, because combating climate change is critical to our business. And we see this because athletes whether you're an elite athlete participating in the Olympics, which many of us saw the Paris Olympics and witnessed that a few months ago, or you're an everyday athlete like my daughter who loves basketball and loves to play basketball outdoors. We know that climate change is affecting athletes' access to and participation in sport. And so for us, when we approach this work, it's very, very clear that it's part and parcel of our business. And it's foundational to our business. And so, you know, what we've done at Nike is really focus on protecting the future of sport. And that comes to life because we set an ambition which is really focused on a future which is a zero carbon and a zero waste future. And so what that's done is really focus our drive and our attention from our teammates on bringing this to life. And you know, sometimes the work isn't sexy, right? We're operationalizing this work and again, embedding it in our strategy and our decisions and our actions. But three key elements for us are innovation, integration, and then scale. You know, we put the consumer at the center of everything that we do. And so when we think about innovation, we're innovating on behalf of the consumer. And that could be innovating towards more circular business models. You're gonna get a little tour of some of the things I'm wearing today, but the jacket that I'm wearing—
Check out the sneakers.
I know, I'm getting to that, The jacket is part of Nike Recreate, which is taking secondhand apparel and dead stock fabric and giving it new life. And we work with local designers and cities to bring this to life. Or a platform like Air, which think of the air soles in our shoes. It's one of our most iconic platforms. It's one of our most sustainable platforms, and it's proprietary innovation and technology. It also, air soles happen to contain 50% recycled material. So those are ways that we're innovating. From an integration perspective, again, it's really operationalizing sustainability. And a great example for us is really when we look at our emissions reduction and what we own and what we operate. And so since 2020, we've driven 70% emissions reduction, again, in what we own and operate. A lot of that's been brought to life through renewable electricity procurement, but also through on-site renewable energy. And so in China, in our China Logistics Center, we're powering it by 100% renewable energy, and we have wind on site, we have solar on site, we have geothermal. All of that together is driving us to 100% renewables. And then finally, scale. And scale matters to us, and so now I'm gonna get to the shoes. And so these are the Pegasus 41. It's a beloved franchise. If you're an everyday runner like me, you might put them on, but elite athletes as well run in Pegasus. And what we've been able to do, this is a large volume driver for us. And so as we've been innovating, we've focused on the foam. It's React X foam. And not only does it give better energy return, so it's performance, in fact, 13% energy return, but we've also reduced the carbon footprint of the shoe by 43%. So again, when we bring this work to life, it's really across those three areas. Innovation, really focused on integration in our business, and then how do we scale?
The 43%, is that in material or in like the places you were talking about, the actual production?
It's a combination of the material and actually how we produce the material.
And then like something like a Recreate, I don't know how much of a percentage of Nike that is now, but do you include we'd like this to be X by X, a goal for something like upcycling?
You know, part of our work on circularity is to test things and then ultimately test and pilot them and then determine what the path forward is. But Recreate's really interesting. We've had the opportunity to work with local designers in LA, in London, and in Paris. And so we're going to continue to do that work because we think, again, it's really testing different innovation for circular business models.
Can you tell from the consumer point of view what they care most about? Is circularity it? Is that what you get the most asks for?
I mean, consumers care about sustainability.
Right.
And so I think, you know, Nancy mentioned this, I think it depends on the geography, it depends on the consumer as well. So different consumers, the touch point is different.
Right.
I think what we found is, of course, people want products that work and that are safe.
Exactly.
And what we've really been focusing on lately are combining sustainability claims with what we call efficacy claims, which is so if you're buying skincare, you want the skincare to work and it's also sustainable. And I think what's, you know, listening to JC, what's so exciting is you're hearing that sustainable attributes are becoming part of innovation in terms of the product innovation.
Correct.
So one thing that you can all do today is to buy products that are sustainable. Because at the end of the day, if you do the math around climate change, unless you have corporations at the table. And the mayor said similarly, unless we're at the table making changes, we're not going to be able to grow economies and also to grow greener solutions. We've also found, and I can't tell you how fabulous your campaign is, and it's beautifully branded. Because one of the questions always with trees as companies is when you invest is what happens to the trees. So the fact that you have the ongoing care of the trees as part of the environment, I think is terrific. But one of the things we've also seen is that first movers, there's a big advantage. So we invested very early on in wind in a VPPA in Oklahoma, with the famous song is Where the Wind Comes Sweeping Down the Plain. And happily, there's a lot of wind in Oklahoma. So we've literally, our company has made $4.5 million from selling green energy back into the grid. And so I think that what we're also seeing is that companies like ours are encouraged to innovate in terms of our product design, but also in terms of our windmills. And then lastly, we do see big regional variances in what consumers want. In the UK, very high level of literacy on climate, particularly probably because of the COP, but very much interested in the company's footprint in the US. Not surprisingly, I say this as an American, we're very focused on our footprint. So we have, for instance, carbon calculators on our websites. In Europe, we see incredible interest in sustainable packaging as well as sustainable attributes. So lots of, I think, really, really interesting.
It seems like both of you agree on a consumer side, though, just because I think that's so interesting with your companies. What do you suggest to a consumer to inform them? Like, how do they know that the product they're buying is truly sustainable? Because that word has so many definitions.
Well, I would say educate, educate, educate. We just launched an ingredient glossary on our corporate website. We have, for our key brands, ingredient glossaries as well. So you can click on and understand what an ingredient is and what it does. And we're seeing generally that the level, particularly coming out of COVID, of consumer education is very, very high. And again, the more you ask, the more we are able to create sustainable products.
And for us, what you'll see, the consumer experience is what we call move to zero. And so you'll see actually the pinwheel, which if I had my jacket closed, you would see it. That pinwheel, you can shop the pinwheel essentially on our website, and you can see Move to Zero come to life, and again, look at the product attributes and understand recycled content, what the percentage is in the product as well.
The other big piece we haven't spoken about that the mayor really touched on is the social piece. We've really focused on, in our foundation, the communities where we live, work, and source, and tried to partner with groups like Conservation International and the Amazon, BSR in Indonesia. But I'd be very interested in the mayor's perspective of how companies can do more, how we've helped your campaign and how we could help it more.
Well, I think what's been really fascinating is the consumer ethos, the consumer society that I hear you both talk about. And that's really, in many ways, what has kind of contributed to us being where we are today. So it's really encouraging and reassuring to hear the steps you're taking, really practical steps. But from where I sit, and although clearly my co-chair is Sadi Khan, and he's introduced the ULEZ, which is a low emission zone tackling air pollution. So we go from air pollution concerns in a big city like London to concerns about waste management in a city like Accra. And for many cities in the developing world, one of our biggest challenges is plastic. And so in terms of how you help, I would say the number one thing is reducing those emissions. Bringing that carbon footprint down, because ultimately what that does impacts us directly. But we are also impacted by the products that come to us. And I think the work you're doing is great, but there are many other areas where I think we've found that as developing cities, more consciousness about reuse and recycling is really required. It's so easy to adopt cultures, and part of the culture which has been sold to the world is this buy. You must have the next thing. You must have the next item. I'm not going to name any products so I don't get sued.
It's all of them. It's okay.
But you know what I mean. Somebody just produced something very recently, and so I think it's also going to be an interesting journey, and the youth of the world are taking a big role in this, challenging and pushing back on the consumerism and sort of saying, we don't necessarily need to have that new pair of trainers. And I see what you mean about coming out of a job, but I'm sure Estee Lauder will be here for many, many, many years to come. I'm a user.
As my grandmother would say, from your lips to God's ears.
But if I could just say that perhaps from our perspective, having the crisis, dealing with real-time solutions, in our case, besides Freetown, the Tree Town, another intervention that we've been sort of championing has been introducing a cable car to reduce transport pollution. That's another big source of pollution and emission, small in global scales, but from a health perspective, big for the locals, for our local population. Clean energy, and the question of what that is and where it should come from. Solar is great, but I can't think about solar without thinking about lithium batteries and thinking about their disposal and thinking about the mining of the minerals and what goes on in the Congo to enable that to happen. So we've actually been focused on a circularity, which is a bit different. And we've developed a very simple technology. I'm sure it's not a patent, but we haven't come across it before. But we're going to scale now. We're going to scale on using fecal sludge from what we all do every day.
Yes.
Yes, that. Using fecal sludge to make briquettes. So 82%, and this is one of our dilemmas, 82% of cooking fuel in our city is actually wood or wood-based, which means there's a constant drive to cut down trees, for Freetown, the Tree Town, to be sustainable, and for it not just to transfer the tree chopping out of the city into the next district. And we're also seeking to provide a substitute. And we've worked on this technology for 2 years. We're now producing 2,000 tons a week. By the end of October, it should be 2,000 tons an hour. And the city residents have really embraced the notion of odorless, clean technology, which also deals with or contributes towards addressing sanitation and hygiene challenges in informal settlements around the city. So I think you talked about innovation, integration, and scale. And I think that's very similar to the approach that we're taking as a city and an approach that many cities are taking. Our residents are driving the need for protection when it comes to adaptation, because people's lives and properties are at risk from the impact of climate change. But in your part of the world, your residents are also driving the cuts in emissions. And when I say residents, I say that very deliberately, because as city governments, we really do respond to residents. And I'd be interested to understand the relationships that you have perhaps with the local councils, the local governments that your businesses' operations are in.
Well, I would say we primarily partnered, actually there's a great group called Co-Impact that's working with women in the Global South around solutions. We candidly have partnered, I would say, more directly with the communities. I do think there is a lot of runway on partnering with municipalities because, as you know, you all set the standards for recycling. And I have to say, people are very confused about recycling. And in our industry, 80% of our products are thrown away in the bathroom, and people don't recycle in the bathroom. So I do think that we would love to partner around the disposal of our products. We've also started to work, we just launched a sustainable store design program. We have 35 stores really working to lower the footprint of our retail. I think that's another area we could work with local government. And then what we have found, in the developed and the developing world is, sadly, there is a group, primarily the poorest among us, that are the most impacted by lack of clean water, basically dirty fuel, and lack of access to green electricity. So we would love to figure out a way to partner with you, and congratulations.
So there's a really great initiative with Amazon on freight. So reducing freight and committing to use electric vehicles for a certain percentage of the trips done in some of the countries of our members in Latin America. So I think the notion of how we can partner is definitely one that we'd be very willing to explore.
Terrific.
So thank you very much for the introduction.
Yeah. Hey,
We're getting a lot of work
We'll
done
be
up
taking
here.
the
I hope you guys are
forward.
taking notes.
I think that's, we're coming up on time, but I think that you hit it best. And I haven't purchased any new clothing or any new clothing items for more than 2 years in an effort to reformat our brains and the psychology of our brains and I'm sorry, because I know we have to eventually buy things, but the circularity being really important was of great interest to me. So thank you for bringing that up, and I do hope that you all chat more as we go. But can we please give a warm round of applause?
Thank you, Ginger.
Thank you so much. Of course. So come on up. You guys can go ahead. I'm going to stay up here. Of course, thank you. Well, that was nice. That was great. I think we are going to move on now. Yes, good. Helen is coming back. She is going to switch from moderator to panelist and will remain on stage for this segment. So please join me in welcoming also our moderator, Maria Mendelus, CEO of the We Mean Business Coalition, and Helen's fellow panelists, Sherry Madeira, CEO of CDP, Ulrike de Cohen, Chief Communication, Brand and Sustainability Officer at AXA, and Ashari's Group Head of Sustainability, Preeti Srivastav. Please join me in welcoming all of them. Thank you, ladies.
Well, thank you. I was told I need to speak very loud, which is not something I normally do. So those in the back, if you cannot hear me, wave me, so then we all wake up to the challenge that we have an audience that is enormous. Thanks for coming here. It's a real pleasure to be in this panel because all these women are really good friends of mine. We have been working for many years, well, some more or less, all very much linked to the Women Business Coalition that this year is marking its 10th year anniversary. And so before coming to this panel, I listened to the climate group event when Women Business was launched. And there was Christiana Figueres, Tim Cook, and many of the partners. And they were very excited because there were 4 million people that marched in the street back in 2014. And I was thinking, that was impressive, but now we have 80% of the world population that is asking governments to do something on climate. So look at the progress in terms of society awareness of the challenge. At the time, we had only a few companies part of the coalition. Now we have 17,000 companies that have set commitments to be aligned with Paris and more. So I think progress has been quite important in terms of ambition. And also, as you know, the countries, they need to now ratchet their national plans. And they're starting those discussions now. And it's in some ways, it's easier than the first time. In others, it's also hard because they need to deliver on the previous NDCs, and we see that that's not happening. And at the same time, they need to ratchet the ambition so that we can be closer to 1.5. So it's going to be interesting. And it's going to be really interesting to hear from this panel what each one of you is doing in that regard and in regards of climate leadership and corporate disclosure. So let's get started. I'm going to start with CDP, with Sherry. So 1 year on the roll, or not less, or maybe less.
Not quite.
Not quite.
It'll be next week that I'll be 1 year as CEO of CDP.
So project yourself 10 years from now, and then tell us what would happen. Tell us what is key in terms of corporate disclosure for companies. We're asking for more transparency and accountability. We're also hearing many companies complain that there's too much and that they've been asked in many jurisdictions different things. And I know you're doing a lot of work to make sense of this. And what's next for CDP?
Great, thank you, Maria. And I've never been tasked with speaking louder, so hopefully I will project. Thank you very much for having us here. This is a really important beginning of a really important week, especially for CDP. Because as you say, Maria, I think that part of that old adage, which is what you can measure, you can manage, is also needing to be brought into 2024 and beyond. which means that actually you have to also balance the burden of reporting and transparency with the benefit, and making sure that disclosure is not just for disclosure's sake. So some of this is new nomenclature on an age-old, 24-year-old narrative that is CDP. Can you believe it? 24 years CDP has been in this ecosystem. Now, I'm going to claim it. 24 years ago, CDP created the climate data ecosystem globally. And I have a huge honor of being able to lead that organization into the new phase of thinking about what data is for. And let's all actually have that in mind this week. Because as data becomes disclosed by, we had almost 24,000 companies around the world disclosed to CDP last year, they are doing it and it's costing them money. So I think that we need to think about going forward, how is that data being used? How is it that we can really think in terms of the corporate who is making that investment and reward the investment of transparency? Because if we do not have that data, we will all be making decisions in more of a vacuum, with blindsiding, not understanding even how between jurisdictions we can make comparability. And from our point of view at CDP, we need to start thinking about why is that investment being made at the C-suite? Why is the CFO signing off? Okay, I'll spend the money on actually putting the time in and the resources to make this data come to light, to be able to surface it. And there are really three, I'm a simple person in a complicated data world. There are three reasons why. Access to capital. Over 700 of the world's investors, thank you, AXA, for being one of them, that sign up to CDP to say, we are signatories and we want this data because it is going to go into the mix in terms of how it is that we allocate capital. Access to capital. The second one is that customers are asking companies. This is a business efficiency. This is core business. If you want to keep your customers and they're asking for your data in terms of climate, actually that's pretty compelling. It's also about trying to drive efficiencies internally. And the third, of course, is compliance. And we celebrate the fact that mandatory reporting is becoming more and more adopted around the world. Be that obviously the juggernaut of ESRS and CSRD in Europe, or the adoption of ISSB. And last week, CDP announced that in Brazil, CVM, the regulator there, which is adopting ISSB, is partnered exclusively with CDP in order to be able to collect that data so that those companies can do something quite special, which is use it for that compliance, but also all the other use cases. I said I was going to keep it simple. Access to capital, business efficiencies, and compliance. It's the ABCs. If we're not talking the language of business, to be able to say that this is why this investment is made, I think that this whole ecosystem will suffer. So from, maybe that's a different way of putting things forward, but I think that that's a really compelling piece. And if we don't have that data, we're going to struggle with managing this going forward. And certainly, I think it's time, to quote the theme for today, tomorrow, hopefully for the rest of the week, which is it's time to be able to make sure we're speaking the language of business and corporates in order to be able to take not only data and transparency forward, but it's the action on that data that we really want. So hopefully that gives an idea of where we're going.
Thank you. Really exciting. Let me move to Preeti. So Asahi, most of your emissions come from your supply chain. And I'm so impressed that you want to be carbon neutral across your supply chain by 2040. This is easy said, difficultly achieved. So tell us, how are you going to do that? What is the role of data, which is certainly a huge challenge? And yeah, how is it going to work for you?
I was already thinking I should say I have no idea. But it's true. I don't think any of us in the room or the corporates or the NGO worlds know how exactly we're going to hit some of the targets that we are committing to. What we are doing is we are taking that leap of faith. And, regulations and public scrutiny aside, what that matters or what the game changer will be is how we go above and beyond when we talk about ambitions and actions. And so this year, Asahi moved its 2050 target to 2040. It wasn't hubris or some moralistic dogma. It was based on science and data, and what we realized was if we don't push the ambition now, very clearly there will be not enough momentum to even meet our 2030 targets, which are the building blocks of what we decide to do in the next decade. And of course, we had an exhaustive internal consultation process on why, what does this mean, investments, course correction. A spirited debate is putting it very mildly. It was an intense discussion, but we also discussed it with our external stakeholders. With We Mean Business, we're signatories of science-based targets, we disclose with CDP, we're part of United Nations Global Compact. So this target is rooted in science, in data, and all power to transparency. And I know a lot of my colleagues internally and externally are quite fixating on the 2040 target, which is great, I love it too. But I love more what is happening because of that target now. We are redefining our sustainability journey. We are accelerating things that we hadn't planned on doing so. It's like when you want a six-pack, that's your target, or my target. And achieving that target will be great. Of course that will be great. But what is more fun is the motivation and the discipline it creates to go to the gym every day. And that's what 2040 target for us is. It's really forcing us to recalibrate our compass and pull out all stops. And that's what we are doing. We've already integrated sustainability into our entire business. And when I say it, I don't mean just our mission statement. I mean our strategy, our leadership, our products, our profit. I'll say that again, our profit and our performance incentives. We have an internal carbon price. We came up with something called sustainable EBITDA, which is a novel way of looking at our profits with sustainability integrated, which is deciding our investment decisions, which is connected to our senior leadership bonuses. And finally, innovation. And that sprouted because of this 2040 ambition. That sprouted because until now, sustainability innovation was just a concept. Sure, we should do it. Let's wait for it. Somebody else will do it. But now the onus is on us. And I'm very excited, and Helen and I were already speaking about this earlier. I'm very excited and very pleased to announce that we are launching something called an Asahi Sustainability Innovation Program. Very long acronym. But it's just very simple. It's focused on searching, selecting, and supporting the game changers, the innovators, the startups, the researchers, academics, NGOs that are putting their talent and their time on fixing the planet. It's about connecting some of these technologies to investments. It's about connecting some of these prototypes to actual implementation, because that's what we can do. And obviously, we can't do this alone. And it's an open call to any company who would like to join us, because we obviously can't do this alone. And I think when we talk about climate, we will all either win or lose as one. But I'm happy to share more about the program later.
Yeah, we'll come back to that, and also industry collaboration in that respect. But certainly, we have seen that countries and companies that set targets, they outperform their peers, and they reduce emissions much faster, etc. So
I hope so.
Obviously, yeah, when you set the targets, you want to achieve it. Yeah? It might not be easy, but it does give the focus to the company and also a shared purpose to the employees on what it is to be delivered. And so congratulations for that, and keep pushing. Let me move to Helen, because with RE100, EV100, these are the most ambitious targets. We both agree that this is quite simple. We need to move from fossil to clean. We need to replace fossil fuel with clean energies. And you have so much experience with those two programs. Yeah, tell us what have you learned from the companies doing so, and what's next?
Yeah, so thank you. RE100 is also celebrating 10 years, and I think we've learned by doing over that period, and we're taking what we've learned in that into our newer campaigns like Steel Zero, Concrete Zero. What we've learned is, I think when we started that, the idea, again, quite simple. We're going to get companies to commit to 100% renewable electricity. And they will then report each year on how they're doing, and we'll use that to send these demand signals into markets. How do you create tipping points? You aggregate this demand, and somehow the demand does it. And I think we hadn't probably thought through that exact mechanism. And over time, we've learned so much more about how do you go from demand to actual change. A lot of that comes from looking at the data. And what's interesting, I think, is we've partnered with CDP over the years on RE100. And I think they're probably looking at the size of the number. You want that number to get bigger and bigger. We want that too. But we're also really interested in the negative space that's left. So, okay, you've got up to 92%. The company's very excited. They've gotten a certain amount of that probably through PPAs, some of it through certificates in markets. We've got very strict technical criteria for what counts. The numbers are getting up there. And then what we say is, okay, but where can't you buy renewable electricity? And so what's really powerful for us is looking at those markets where the numbers are telling us they're not getting renewable electricity. And that's where we then direct our policy work, which we've really evolved over the last 5 years. And the data was telling us, and we also do qualitative surveys, why aren't you getting it there? Where are you struggling? South Korea, Japan have kept coming up. So we have 80 companies in Japan, about 30 in South Korea. And what we do is work with partners in those countries to develop policy messages for those markets. And then we have different ways of pushing it. In some markets, it's climate group going and talking. So I've been to South Korea a number of times in the last year and had really good meetings with governments and sort of pushing the message and saying, you've got all this pent up demand for renewable electricity, the investment is ready to go. What's stopping you is regulation and permitting and things like that. How can you switch your policy? And in South Korea in particular, we've seen our policy messages sort of picked up and put into their policy. So that's the way that we're trying to work. And we're expanding now into other markets and building that model. So it's that starting, again, with the data, and what does that tell you? What does that tell you about the shape of markets? And then how do you get the companies to then get behind a policy message? Do you put the companies in front of the governments, or is it climate group? And that's what we're sort of learning as well as we go along.
Yeah, I think what Helen is saying is true, that there is a lot you can do through leadership, but at the end of the day, there is a lot of regulation that will unlock that leadership. Yeah?
And reinforcing that it's ready to go. Companies are saying, look, we want to get to 100%, but this is what's stopping us. I think that can be powerful as well, because it's not that there's then a demand for finance, it's how do you unlock this? Yeah.
And that's the value of your group, because you're bringing a group of companies that are demanding that change. So it's not one company, it's a group of them, because collaboration is as Preeti has said, more important than ever. We're going to move to insurance. I was yesterday with Sherry on a very interesting meeting, and we were talking about, oh yes, it's so expensive, new infrastructure, clean infrastructure, there is a premium and all that, but are we accounting the cost of inaction? Because the cost of the fires, the cost of floods, etc., because that's already a cost, right? We tend to think new technologies are expensive, but yeah, to build new infrastructure is expensive. Well, start to deduct, the cost. You will see that maybe it's much more worthwhile. So tell us, Ulrika, what is the role of insurers in de-risking climate infrastructure, and how can you help unlock the capital for sustainable infrastructure?
Thank you very much, Maria. And you're right. First, it's for those of you who don't know us, we are an insurance company called AXA, not AXA, as I hear a lot here in the States. But and we are, French roots, hence my accent. But we are very present across the globe, especially on the commercial side. We are one of the leading commercial insurers across the world. And maybe also for those of you who maybe did not follow, I think 10 years ago, our former CEO stood on a stage in Paris during COP21 and said that a world that would warm by over 4 degrees would no longer be insurable. And that seemed like a sort of shock sentence, but very far away. And the truth is, if you look at the costs of natural catastrophes across the globe, we are actually there. We're not yet at 4 degrees, but temperatures are warming, and we're seeing the exponential effects of those events. And so if you'd ask somebody, I mean, what we're trying to do at AXA, if we try to formulate what is our goal through our sustainability journey, which really accelerated very much at that point, it's really to contribute to make the world insurable at an affordable price, because we can always insure, but the thing is, how do we keep it affordable for our clients and to make the economy more resilient? So there are a number of ways we can do that. I think what we've been doing on the investment side, where of course a big asset owner is pretty well known, and I think the contribution that the investment world can do to transition is an important one. Interestingly for us, we've been growing our target on green investments over the years, and what we're doing now is really looking at a different way of looking at it. How much money are we investing into, how much capital are we ready to invest into transition? And that transition economy would cover the green economy, but also those industries and those sectors of the economy that still are not there and have transition plans that we believe are credible. So this is the investment side, but I believe what we're seeing is that a lot of impact can be brought as well on the insurance and underwriting side. There was a very interesting study recently by the broker Howden and BCG that was sharing that of the 19, I think, trillion dollars committed to net zero across the world, over 10 trillion will have to be covered by insurance solutions that are not yet ready or existing. So those are new technologies, those are new business models, thinking about circular economy, in transportation, energy, agriculture. So a lot of changes happening, and we really need to challenge ourselves to find the solutions, take more risk, to make sure that these changes can really, capital can flow to the right places, and that we can build a sustainable model for these new technologies. So that's a challenge, but also an innovation opportunity, as you can imagine, and we're very dedicated. We have an internal target of how much premium we want to have representing those new net zero technologies and economic sectors. And then the third piece, and I end with the one that a lot of our customers would say is the most important one today, is what we can do on the adaptation front. So this is really, in Europe, for example, the number one question we get asked by customers, by regulators, is how are we going to contribute to helping society adapt to what is already there, the changing climate patterns and natural events. And this is also a field that is changing a lot the way we see our job, our business. We're engaging our distributors to be much more engaged in sharing data. We'll probably talk about it later, to the customers on their exposure, what they can do. And the good news about it is that what we're seeing is prevention works. So it's not all catastrophic and gloomy. We see some of the most dire natural events that happened in the past, when they replicate in the same place and with the same severity, if governments have taken the right measures, prevention measures, or citizens and businesses, there's really a way to lower the cost. So I think there's a whole new field in which the insurance sector can be and has to be very impactful to support society and economy on that journey.
Thank you. Definitely, understanding the data, it's fundamental for any business, and in that sense, CDP, the work that it has done over the year, has allowed us to get here. But there are millions of companies that still need to report, and reporting is complex. So tell us, Sherry, I know that this is your bread and butter, that you're trying to simplify as much as possible and make the systems interoperable. How is CDP going to help companies?
Yeah, that word simplification, I think, is important. And CDP has not done a good job to date. I think...
Some people agree with you.
We're all in this together. I'm glad that we're all on the same page.
The biggest corporate therapy session.
Yeah, absolutely. We should get a mic passed around. Actually, let's not. But the fact of the matter is that we do need to make sure that we're driving simplicity as we're driving scale. And this is not because, isn't that going to be easier for everyone? Sure, we want it to be easier. We're not pulling back on any of our ambitions. We want to be able to make sure that that data is truly being used and that we balance the burden that I'm hearing about all the time with the benefit. And this is, again, not some ethereal thought for efficiency, because every dollar that a company spends on reporting is a dollar that they cannot spend on action. And that's not okay. So CDP's role going forward has got to redress that balance together with the ecosystem. Because remember, we're servicing the investor community. We're servicing the wide range of corporates in every industry sector. We're servicing the supply chains. 350 of the world's largest supply chains work with CDP, which is over $6 trillion worth of purchasing power that is actually asking for help through CDP, practically speaking, so that they can deal with their scope 3, but also proactively speaking so that they can work with their supply chains to find ways of lowering the carbon emissions, lowering the emissions overall, thinking about actually how you drive a sustainable future. So all of these stakeholders want their questions answered. So you see my problem. So what we need to do is to be able to leverage all of the knowledge that's in this room and in the support for what CDP is doing because we are a part of this ecosystem, and drive that simplicity without eroding the fact that data that is being put into the system is needed, is being used. So how do we do that, Maria? I'd love to wave a magic wand, but as we all know, this is going to be a journey that we'll all go on together. But if we all have the same thought process, which is we need to drive write once, use many. And that is not going to be accomplished by mandatory reporting alone. In fact, I worry that with mandatory reporting, which again, we celebrate, we want this, CDP has been banging the drum for doing this for many, many years. So this is a good thing. And I worry that with just mandatory reporting, we're going to have less data in more silos around the world. Because going back to my CFO, who's now hanging out and sitting on my shoulder constantly, that person is going to keep saying, what is the return on my investment for making this data more transparent and being able to deliver it? How is it that I'm going to be able to take the risk out of putting that data into the world? How is it that I'm going to navigate the geopolitics of being able to put that data into the world, and how is that being used? These are all realities that we're facing. So we need to think about how it is that we do all those things so that we write them once, use it many. And we see CDP as having that mission going forward, uniquely. Because where we have mandatory reporting, there's a jurisdiction involved. We can debate that Europe is perhaps having a very large jurisdiction, especially if you consider CSDDD and ESRS, et cetera. Many, many companies fall into, over the course of the next few years, needing that compliance mechanism. But it isn't global, and we need a global solution to the climate challenge. And CDP's jurisdiction is the world. So help us make that data as comparable and as use case centric as possible. And I think, Priti, you mentioned, coming from a disclosure's perspective, the mention of targets, of transition plans. And often people think about CDP who don't know us quite as well, that we really focus on scope 1 emissions, scope 2 emissions, scope 3 emissions. Actually, some of the questions we're asking are also to try and build up a credible transition plan. Because increasingly, an auditable trail of what happened yesterday isn't enough. It isn't helping us enough to be able to join up to the big picture, and something Maria said earlier, which is we're all actually working not only towards an industry and an economy that is sustainable, but also a world that's sustainable, and we need to join up to what the governments are committing to for us. And when we think about the COP process coming up and the new NDCs, a whole of economy approach is really what brings the most logic to any of those targets. Because without that, what is it an NDC is doing? it's claiming a target for the future that hasn't got the buy-in of some of the most important industrial sectors in their jurisdiction. So that's where CDP sees our ability to move forward.
Let's move to the disclosures and the uses of data. So you have a unique opportunity. You are here with this
To address
CEO.
Sherry right here, right now.
Many people, you're representing many people in the audience that have many suggestions on how to make this more efficient.
Yeah.
And also, Ulrika, from your side, about what is the data that you really need, because being bombarded by data is not useful neither. So can you give us two minutes each? We need to...
I'll stick to 2 minutes.
Okay, very good.
And to your point, there was this mantra bouncing around for a while, move fast, break things. And my spiel was, sure, but please replace the broken thing with something better. Otherwise, we are in a broken world. And that's why I love the data movement. I love the regulations, and I know I'm the minority. I love the public scrutiny, because to me, it is really, it is telling me that the governments and the people and the NGOs care about what the corporates are doing, and B, that they are interested in contributing and being critical, and even in various shapes and forms, wanting to know more details of what you are exactly doing. So I love it, all power to transparency. But at the same time, I think it is forcing corporates like ours to just take a beat, think better, work harder, and make sure that every single ambition and action is rooted in science and data. I honestly don't think that's at all ask. I think that's a fair ask. A lot of us are finding it overwhelming. Sure, it's like broccoli. You don't like it, but doesn't mean it's not good for you. I think, you know, I am a big proponent for it. And I am overwhelmed by ESRS and CSRD and CSDDD. But I welcome it, because without that, we would all be free-floating with no idea of where we are heading. And the second bit to it is, once we have our house in order, we have a clearer picture of where we are going. And a lot of us were in this forecasting, speculation mode of, you know, this is our roadmap to scope 3, this is how we will do it. But I think all of this is actually forcing us to just root everything we say and everything we do in actually data and evidence. And it cannot be just for a few corporates. And I like that this is creating a level playing field for everybody to show your data and to show your evidence before you claim that you want to be ambitious.
Yeah, so not much to add. I have the same feeling as you, that I'm the minority who is all in favor of
I guess we are majority
reporting
now.
and disclosures.
2 of us.
It's really important if you take, like, on our site, we are a business that has much more at stake in our scope 3 emissions, and the bigger impact is in the companies we invest in, and somehow also the companies we work with on the insurance side. And if you don't want to be forced into only excluding sectors and you know, to keep your net zero trajectory, which I don't think we should do, because again, there's this huge need of funding and transformation in the economy, having those data to make sure that you're working with the right people, that you're investing in the right companies who have really credible transition plans and credible pathways is absolutely key. And I think there is a fear in the, you know, for financial players like us who feel very committed, that one day we will wake up and say, oh my God, you know, we were, you know, there is this feeling that we don't have enough reliable data to do that job. So yeah, very much looking forward. CSRD, as you know, enters into action next year. Will be the first year. It's going to be really interesting to see where do we get that balance between access to data and does it really help the comparability to understand what's going on in a company's business model. And I hope Europe will be pragmatic as well as to the learnings and how we need to evolve that framework going further.
Thank you. So let me remind you all that the data is the means, not the end. And so I want to give the final word to Helen, because you use that data to actually make change, you know, and achieve emission reductions and achieve this transformation from fossil to clean, get more companies to be 100% renewable, 100% EVs, thanks to regulations that then can impact millions of companies. So how do you see the role of corporate leadership moving forward, the role of collaboration?
I think it's you know, what we need to see now is companies holding their nerve, because it's going to get harder, right? That's the tough news. And, you know, you shouldn't have any low-hanging fruit. It's not a phrase you hear so much now, but a few years ago, everyone was like, what are the low-hanging fruit? You shouldn't have any left, which means this is getting harder to do, and the data is going to create those feedback loops. And so I think looking into then, what can we do? You know, we know that the engine of corporate action is competitiveness, right? A lot of this is going to come in that collaboration space, and that takes bravery, and it is more complex. But as you understand, well, this is what we compete on, but we can collaborate over here. This is where we can start to unlock that change. So I think the next few years are going to be holding your nerve, participating, you know, in things with some of your competitors, but in a collaborative way. And that's where we can use this platform now to create, as you say, Priti, the level playing field. Because a lot of the regulation we need is not going to affect your competitiveness if it affects all your competitors the same way. Because in the end, those aren't the things that, for most of you, you're competing on. And so that is going to be the shape of the next few years, I think.
Thank you. Yes, so I think tomorrow the Women Business Coalition, which we are all proud members of, is going to launch a playbook. And we have done some polling to consumers and investors about how much they value the investment in clean energy, the fact that some companies are saying, I'm going to phase out fossil fuels. And that the polls show that consumers are really positive about companies that are doing so, to a large, you know, in numbers, in the 70s and 80%. Investors think that investing in clean energy will outperform all the sectors except AI. So it's consumers want it, investors want it, regulations will come. And so I think there's plenty of incentives for this transition, but we cannot do that if we don't measure well our progress. So please engage with this group, with Sherry, with Helen, in making sure that that data is correct, but is used for the right purposes. Thank you so much. Enjoy the rest of the day.
Thank you. Great. We're going that way.
We're following
That way.
Maria.
Please come on down. Of course. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Well, thank you all so much. I know everything's running a few minutes behind, and we have a very short break for refreshments, so please go ahead and help yourself to that break. But the streams are coming up: the new industrial revolution, the energy and transport stream, nature, food systems and health, leadership and green growth. And all of those will start promptly at 11. So make sure to grab your seat at the one that resonates. Thank you all for being here this morning.